There's a rather profound question that has arisen from the program that was conducted in Europe, because it can be said that the general consensus that was arrived at was that when love is dead, only love remains. So if we translate that and we recognize that the love that has died is that human love in all its forms, up to and including unconditional love, then what is this love that remains? And so this is the question that we'll endeavor to answer, or at least come to an understanding and experience of. That Divine Mother very often would say to us, even the angels have to come down to earth and take human form to walk the ninth pathway to the One. Now, one could ponder on that endlessly, but if we answer this question, well, what is it that remains when all of human love is played out and dead, so to speak? We can answer and understand what it was that was said. And it reminds of that story of the time when the highest of the celestial beings, oftentimes called God, was aware of a cloud rising up from earth, a cloud that contained sadness, melancholy, inertia. And so, pinpointing where that cloud was coming from, the highest authority called one of his angels and said, "Do you see that cloud of sadness, melancholy and inertia down there?" And the angel said, "Yes." And the highest authority said, "Would you be willing to go down and see if you can do something about that?" The angels said, "Yes, willingly." So that afternoon, when the sun was just going past its highest point, bringing the heat of the day to this little hamlet, the people, being very tired from the heat of the sun and their toils of the day, had gathered in the town square under a magnificent, huge tree that grew there. Under its shade they were languishing, when all of a sudden, coming down one of the streets leading into the square, they saw this strange being, such as they'd never seen before. He had this hat on his head that had little bells on it. He wore a scarlet cloak that covered purple trousers that had stars and moons embossed all over it. And he had shoes that curled up at the toes with little spangles dangling from its point. What a strange apparition was there. Their mouths fell open, but then, of course, all their fears and doubts came in, and when this being entered the town, they said, who are you? What are you doing here?" And this being said, "Oh, I'm just a traveller that wanders from place to place, meeting people and enjoying the pleasures of this wonderful place." "Wonderful place," said the town mayor. "Look at us. This is dull. There's nothing going on." "Oh," said the being, "look at this magnificent tree. Hear the bird. Oh, listen to that screeching." And so this gave a very clear picture of where the people of this place were at. But this being sat down amongst them, and he said, but look at the beauty of this place. And they negated everything that he said, every positive word that he had to say about the beauty of their town was negated by them. And of course the day passed and was completed, and the being said, oh, I smell mint and saffron. Oh, they said, stew and more stew and more stew, that's all we get in this town. But it was time for them to go off to have their evening meal and to go to rest. So the people started to wander off back to their houses, and left in the town square the being, the strange being who had entered into that place. Well, finally quiet came about throughout the whole town, and the lamps were turned out and candles blown out. But the being had begun to wander down the streets of the town as it came to rest, and he listened at the windows, at the comments that were being made by the people of the town. You know, the tradesmen who said, oh, I only made 3 sales today, I don't know how I'm going to keep food on the table for my family, and other such comments. And he noted these as he wandered about the streets of the town. But then finally, when all the lamps and the candles were out, he came back to a place under the great tree, and he floated up to a branch where he rested his feet, his turned up toes. And then he took out from his cloak a little silver flute, and he began to play first a melancholy tune, becoming more strident, and then a very strange thing happened. In all of the houses in that place, people started to toss and turn and toss and turn and have dreams, as all the sadness, all the melancholy rose to the surface of their psyches in that dream state. But as the being played, and the sound of his flute became more strident, all of a sudden he blew a long and sibilant note that had everyone sitting up in their beds wide awake, being called out. So people from their houses streamed out of their doors and came out to the town square, where the being was seated under the magnificent tree. And the mayor of that town said, what is the meaning of this? Why have you called us all out to this place? But the being continued to play his flute, and an amazing thing occurred. Out of the mouths of the people came stones and clay and bits of debris that gathered in a great pile at the base of the tree. But everyone began to feel lighter. They were so surprised. A lightness came upon them. And then the being put his flute back in his cloak, and he spoke to the people. He said, all of these stones, all of this debris represents the sadness, the melancholy, the burdens that you have carried in your lives. But nothing is what it seems. And he picked up from the pile a piece of coal, and he turned to the mayor of the town and he said, "This represents your frustration, your sense of responsibility, the times, day and night, you've paced up and down, wishing that you could make better the lives of the people of your town." And the being placed between his hands this piece of coal, and he squeezed his hands together. And when he opened his hand, there in his hand was an exquisite diamond. Now, taking a string, the being tied the diamond to a branch of the tree, and then he turned to each and every one in that town, picking up their piece of debris and relating to them what it was, transforming it into rubies, emeralds, beautiful stones which were hung from the tree. One old woman said, "Tell me, this is my piece, a piece of slate." And the being picked it up and said, "This is your loneliness since your husband and your children have left you. This is your loneliness." And he squeezed the piece of slate in its hand, and it became a beautiful, shining crystal, like a prism, giving out light in all directions, and he hung it from the tree. After all the pieces of rubbish were transformed, the tree had become a glittering, glowing festival of color and light. All of the people turned to one another. The student who'd bewailed his teacher went over and clasped his hand, thanking him for his patience when they had been so recalcitrant and disobedient in his class. A wife turned to her husband and embraced him warmly, realizing the sacrifices that he'd made to put food on the table in bad times for them. And so it went on, people clinging to one another, hugging and looking at each other with new eyes of realization and understanding. Then the being said, "The night is still young. It is now time to rest and sleep." And he took out his flute again and played a lullaby. Each and every one of the townspeople went back to their houses and lay down their heads and went into a blissful sleep. In the morning, the mayor of that town woke up, and now waking up with a sense of lightness and anticipation, he slipped on his shoes, only to find that there was a lump in the left corner of the toes. And when he looked, he took out from it the diamond that had hung from the tree. Each and every one of those townspeople, as they put their feet in the shoes, found the gem that had been created from their sadness, their melancholy, and their inertia. What is this that remains when all of human love including unconditional love, the highest of that human love, has played itself out in us so that we can say, love is dead, but all that remains is love. What is this that remains? The gem, the jewels forged out of our spiritual questing, our spiritual adventures, our deaths.